Right, hello guys, welcome back. For about a month and a half now, episode Heresy has been somewhat unofficially concluded, with the main storyline having wrapped up and all of the seasonal content being available to play. I say unofficially since Rite of the Nine is still ongoing and is technically under the same allotted time period given to episode Heresy, but truthfully it is essentially entirely separate. So with episode Heresy having basically finished, today I want to give you my review and discuss why I believe it's one of the best, if not the best season/episode we've ever received, and how it's about the closest thing to the original definition of episodes that Bungie gave us heading into the Year of the Final Shape all that time ago. A lot of this video was made with the help of my Discord community, so make sure to join if you fancy contributing to any future projects. So without further ado, let's begin. The first point I want to cover is the story, and overall the delivery this episode has been mostly top tier. It focuses on the third and final echo that lands on the Dreadnought and reanimates a past version of Oryx the Taken King, which spirals into several storylines about both us and the other Hive siblings wanting to take control over the Echo, which, spoilers, ultimately leads to a confrontation that concludes with us destroying the Echo and thus any trace left of Oryx in the system, neatly wrapping up the story that started way back in 2015. There are also some really nice moments between Eris and Drifter, with their romance taking center stage like never before, something which I wish would have happened between Amanda and Crow, but anyway, I digress. The story, at least for me, was on par with Echo's in terms of my own personal enjoyment, and I especially enjoyed the voice acting work for Oryx. Joshua David King absolutely killed it and was a joy to listen to. My only criticism of the story was that the ending was kind of abrupt and lacking a final cutscene which could have made it a little more impactful. But this wasn't the end of the world, plus the ending also opens up Savathun as an antagonist once again because she wasn't very happy that we killed her brother again. The missing voice lines from Sloane and Xivu Arath were also a bit of a sore spot, but at least for me personally, it wasn't a huge issue since I never really connected with either Sloane or Xivu Arath, and neither were essential parts of the story either. Instead, it focused more on Eris, Drifter, Oryx, and Savathun, who did in fact have fully finished voice lines. Overall though, a very solid story that dealt with some of the franchise's most iconic characters that was by far the strongest offering of the year. Not to mention some insane looking cutscenes too. The content release schedule was yet again altered for episode Heresy, where Bungie took us back to a time-gated format for both the story and activities, and at least in my opinion this was definitely the right move. There was only a small 3-week gap between the conclusion of Act 1 and the beginning of Act 2, then Act 2 led straight into Act 3 with no downtime at all, and as a result it felt like the story didn't stop and was actually moving along nicely week over week. This method of delivery felt far better than what they did in Revenant, where all of the story content released at once, because back then once you finished the story, what little of it there was, it genuinely felt like there was nothing to do. So if you want my take, time gating the story is a good thing and should be the default going forward. So in terms of the overall content release, this was again a pretty good cadence. Now let's talk about the activities on offer, of which there were definitely plenty, starting with the main launch activity, the Nether. The Nether saw us return to the Dreadnought patrol and complete several objectives within each patrol zone, culminating in a boss fight, repeated 3 times in 3 zones for the whole activity. As far as seasonal activities go, this was definitely up there as one of the best ones to date. It was awesome to have the Dreadnought back in almost its entirety, minus the interior of the Cabal ship. The activity itself was novel and interesting, the combat challenges were varied and fun, replaying it didn't get stale as fast as other seasonal activities, and the health tuning experiment was alright, but after the nerf it was not that bad at all. Plus, it also gave a crap ton of loot, was filled to the brim with secrets that actually benefited you if you found them, and continuous engagement made you stronger in the activity if you actively collected the minor boons run over run. The only real pain point was the lack of selectable launch zones for each of the Nether patrol spaces, which towards the tail end of the season made grinding some of the Barrow Dyad quests very tedious since you had to continuously re-roll the activity until you got the correct zone you needed, but overall a very strong seasonal activity. Next was the derealized exotic mission that awarded the Barrow Dyad exotic submachine gun, which was fun for the first run but left something to be desired. It didn't really feel like an exotic mission, but rather a mission that dropped an exotic at the end. It did have some new spaces, but for the most part took place in the regular Dreadnought, and the Spore Room was especially eerie, giving alien vibes, but aside from that, it was pretty forgettable. Though I will say, I did enjoy the break from the format of running the mission over and over to upgrade its corresponding weapon, but this presented its own problems which we will discuss later. The Court of Blades was the Act 2 activity, and overall was an interesting take on a boss rush mode that was the spiritual successor to the Destiny 1 Court of Oryx activity. And all in all, it was fine, but in my opinion, it got a bit too ahead of itself with the augments and awkward to understand descriptions. Really, it should have been far more simple. Just get in, kill a boss, get get out and bonus points for doing it fast. In fact, I would actually argue that the boss rush mode Rushdown from Guardian Games actually was a better version of this activity. No need to overcomplicate with a bunch of augments that 90% of players won't even read or know how to deal with. Though I will say the offering system was quite cool, with you being able to buy powers that made you stronger for the entirety of the run. The Sunless Cell Strike from Destiny 1 returned as the featured activity for Act 3, and in general it's always a win when we get a strike, new or reprised, especially in the case of a Destiny 1 classic, brought back basically 1-to-1, and it is a fairly easy one, which I thought was great. It steered away from the current long and drawn out strikes, which was a nice change of pace and made it a lot more fun to farm, with the updated visuals being especially gorgeous. The Sunder Doctrine dungeon also released during this time period, and while yes, it technically isn't attached to the season, it does deal with some story tidbits related to Heresy and features some voice work from Oryx. But besides that, it was yet another brilliant addition to the dungeon roster that wasn't quite as hard as Vesper's Host, but was definitely challenging in its own way with a solid contest experience, with Zoetic Lockset being one of the most unique raid or dungeon encounters we've ever received. And it also came back around for an additional 24 hours of contest mode due to the PlayStation outage during the original weekend, which was a great decision by Bungie. My only gripe with the activities was that neither the Nether or Court of Blades had matchmaking for their expert difficulties. Ironically, something which Revenant actually got right. And again, the fact that you couldn't launch the zone of your choosing in the Nether. But overall, these were a really strong batch of activities, probably the best we've seen since the Menagerie or the Coil. Equally as important as the activities though is the loot that comes from them. So, how was it? This time round, the majority of the loot was fairly average, with some notable exceptions like Psychopomp, Adamantite, and Watchful Eye. The best part though, despite the average rolls, was that the loot was incredibly plentiful thanks to the Tome of Want. More on that in a moment, and the loot came in 4 separate tiers: Regular, Shiny Regular, Adept, and Shiny Adept, which almost makes me think that Bungie intentionally did this to test the waters for the tiering system coming with the Edge of Fate, and if you fully or at least partially upgraded the seasonal vendor, they would drop with triple perk variants also. And FYI, an Adept triple perk Psychopomp with all perks enhanced is basically a maxed out tier 3 weapon in the Edge of Fate. Furthermore, any version that came with double perks or more also rolled with the Runneth Over origin trait from Kingsfall, a very solid origin trait which was a really nice bonus to have. Plus, it makes total thematic sense because all of these seasonal weapons also originate from the Dreadnought. There was also a full suite of seasonal weapon mods which created fun and unique gameplay opportunities that were absent from previous episodes. A good example is Power of Resolve, which made it so sustained fire unleashed a blast of taken energy that stunned unstoppable champions, which if you slotted into the Watchful Eye machine gun would let you stun both unstops and overloads in the same weapon, which by the way is something they are continuing. And despite me not using these mods that much, probably due to a lack of advertisement, they were still a very positive addition. Exotics wise, we got Barrow Dyad, a very fun weapon that meshes well with a multitude of builds, which is craftable, meaning you can tailor it to your specific playstyle. Lodestar, which was the first ever primary ammo trace rifle, which had some neat synergies with arc builds, but I didn't personally use it that much. Then Finality's Augur, which is one of the most unique exotics we've ever received. So overall, a very creative set of weapons. The only problem was the lengths you had to go to in order to fully upgrade Barrow Dyad, with the majority of the quest tasking you with finding a bajillion secret collectibles scattered across the Dreadnought, which did evoke some of the Destiny 1 calcified fragment chase vibes, but after a while it did get pretty tedious, especially with the later catalyst that involved the Nether RNG which we spoke of earlier. But I do want to emphasize that despite this system not necessarily hitting the mark, it was a very welcome change of pace from having to run the exotic mission god knows how many times, so for that I do think they deserve credit. Certain weapons from Season of Arrivals also had reprisals like Cold Denial and Temptation's Hook, but unfortunately they happened to arrive with some of the most meh perk rolls imaginable and were also a pain to farm, so nothing exciting here really. The Vault of Glass weapons also received a perk pool refresh with a brand new origin trait, and all you need to know is that Hezen Vengeance is by far and away the best rocket in the game bar none, largely due to the origin trait granting double magazine size after simply casting your super, giving way to some seriously strong DPS rotations and opening the door once again for the solo witness challenge to be completed. Fatebringer, Praedith's Revenge, and Corrective Measure also came with very strong perk rolls, so all in all a very good addition to the seasonal loot. As I alluded to earlier, the biggest reason the loot situation felt so good this season was entirely down to the Tome of Want, this season's equivalent of the tonic system from Revenant. And my god, is it so much better than tonics. All you need to do is simply specify what you want, start it up, and then anything you play across the whole game will start to reward you with drops for whatever you focused. No bad RNG, it functioned right from the get-go and always guaranteed a drop. The Tome of Want is by far the best seasonal focusing system we've ever had, and just being able to play whatever you want and still get drops is really nice. nice. Plus, this was also how you boosted your artifact perks, and unlike tonics, there was no timer associated and the perks only dropped the boost if you completed the active ritual, which still isn't perfect, but again, much better than tonics. Arguably, one of the most impactful changes that came alongside Heresy were the wide variety of sandbox changes, mainly due to the addition of the brand new Arcver Bolt Charge and the 3 new aspects Storm's Keep, Ionic Sentry, and On the Prowl. Bolt Charge has been a universally loved ability across the board for the entire season that seriously shook up the DPS meta, especially with Arc Titans running Storm's Keep. Warlocks had a lot of fun with the buff Geomag Stabilizers and Ionic Sentry, and Hunters had a really solid Void aspect that only served to improve their kit. The build crafting possibilities that all 3 of these aspects opened up was a really nice change of pace and made for some seriously fun builds that we've posted on the channel over the months. And as a side note, because we got new aspects, we did not receive brand new exotic armor, but honestly, that was totally fine. New aspects affect a far wider scope than just a singular exotic can, and I wouldn't be at all mad if this happens again in the future. There are still certain monochromatic subclasses that are missing a 4th aspect like Solar Titan, Solar Hunter, and Void Warlock, so giving these a tuning pass would be a very welcome decision. This discussion does also go hand in hand with the seasonal artifact, which this time round had some very solid offerings for Strand, Void, and Arc, as well as Bolt Charge, which made for some really fun builds, plus the return of Particle Deconstruction, or Reconstruction as it is known now. And I don't know about you, but at least for me, it was very fun to relive the linear fusion rifle meta from the Witch Queen days, especially with Queenbreaker. And it's just quite funny to me that if you told a player from Episode Revenant that Queenbreaker was going to be the DPS meta next season, they'd actually just laugh in your face. Moving on, this wouldn't be a good review of Episode Heresy if we didn't talk about the chess community puzzle. It's been such a long time since we have received an in-game puzzle of this magnitude, and the last time was genuinely the Corridors of Time back in 2019. So I think it can be universally agreed that the chess puzzle was one of the outstanding highlights of the episode, with so many people across the community coming together to solve the problem and eventually finding the solution, which also rewarded some pretty cool cosmetics and endgame materials. The sad part is that it will be quite a while before we see one of these events again, but I'm positive it will be worth the wait. Guardian Games also coincided with Heresy, and this time it came with a brand new boss rush mode known as Rushdown, which was such a nice break from the boring copy-paste format that these events have been suffering from in recent years, and to its credit, Rushdown was very fun. It took boss fights from old seasonal content and campaign missions that challenged you to go fast and avoid dying, so really hoping we get to see it come back in the future. Finally, the Heavy Metal Briggs vs Tanks party mode also saw its debut, which came along a rework to how Bungie are handling events in the future with a brand new event battle pass with custom shop windows and currencies, and it was a pretty fun time, so again, yet another W. The one thing about Heavy Metal, please don't let it override Trials of Osiris. That's a bit of a silly decision in my opinion. I also can't seem to recall Heresy having that many bugs or game-breaking glitches, unlike Revenant where it felt like there was a new bug every week, especially with the tonics that literally never worked and took forever to get fixed, by which point people didn't really care anymore. That said though, the season launch day was very bad, and I remember not being able to play for at least 3 hours, which should absolutely not be happening on a season launch day of all things, so I'm a little cautious now when going into the Edge of Fate. In conclusion, Episode Heresy felt like what Bungie promised the episodes were originally going to be, essentially seasons plus, something which Echoes and Revenant didn't really feel like, especially Revenant. They both felt like standard seasons, and I can't exactly put a finger on why, but Heresy really felt like a true episode to me. It's just a shame that neither Revenant nor Echoes were able to capture this feeling. It was very much an extension of what a standard season could be in terms of amount of activities, loot quality and abundance, transformative and engaging sandbox changes, new and exciting community events that get people talking, and a story that for the most part was well paced and compelling. So cheers to you, Heresy, you were and are one of the greats. I know that we're never going to see the likes of the old seasonal or episodic models ever again, but I wanted to make it clear that at the end of it all, the very last iteration of the formula has been, in my opinion, the best they've ever done. And in a year filled with some of the highest highs and lowest lows was the perfect way to cap it all off. And on a more personal note, I attribute Episode Heresy to reigniting my own passion for the game, and I can only express how its success has made me ever more hopeful for the future of this game. The Edge of Fate is a brand new chapter, so let's face it together. I hope you enjoyed my review of Episode Heresy, and feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below as I'm keen to hear your perspective. Anyway, that's all for today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.